I still don't understand how I didn't see it coming. 15 years of marriage, gone just like that. You spend every day with someone, wake up next to them, share your life, your secrets, your dreams, only for them to turn around and say, "I'm leaving you." No explanation. No apologies. Just a suitcase and the sound of the door closing behind them. I still hear that sound in my head. Claudia and I had a life people envied. At least, that's what I thought. We had a rhythm, an understanding. There wasn't a single thing I would have changed about my life. And then Damon moved in next door. I remember the first time I saw him. Cocky, too good looking for his own good. Always smiling like he had the whole world figured out. I didn't like him. Maybe it was instinct, but I ignored it. After all, I trusted my wife more than I trusted myself. I remember one night, sitting on the porch, Claudia beside me, Damon walking over with that smug grin of his. "Hell of a night, huh?" he said, lighting up a cigarette like he owned the damn place. "Yeah," I muttered, barely looking at him. Claudia laughed. "You're always so serious, Darren." I glanced at her. "Someone's got to be." Damon chuckled. "Relax, man. Life's too short to be so tense all the time." That was the first time I noticed how she looked at him. Not in a way that screamed anything obvious, but something lingered there. Amusement, interest. I brushed it off. Claudia loved me. She wouldn't do anything to hurt me. I was a fool. I don't even know how long it was going on before she left. Maybe months, maybe a year. And that's what eats at me. The not knowing. The thought that I spent nights holding her in my arms while she was thinking about someone else. The thought that every time she smiled at me, she was also smiling at him. When she finally told me, she didn't even look guilty. "I'm leaving," she said. I stared at her, confused. "What?" She sighed. "I'm leaving, Darren." "For what? A vacation?" I laughed, but she didn't. That's when I felt the first real crack in my chest. For Damon. I remember standing there, the room spinning around me. "You're joking." She shook her head. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've been together 15 years, Claudia. You don't just throw that away." She didn't cry. She didn't fight. She just said, "I'm sorry," and walked out. The neighborhood chatter says they were an item, but nobody seemed to have any real details. Just whispers, sideways glances, the occasional pitying look when I walked past. Nobody ever had the guts to say it to my face, though. Maybe they thought they were sparing me, or maybe they just didn't want to be the ones to break me completely. I have some real insecurity issues now. I never did before. Was I not enough? Did she crave something I couldn't give her? Was it the excitement, the newness, the thrill of sneaking around? This still made no sense to me. We had a good sex life, better than good. There were never any issues, never any awkward silences or unspoken needs. We were always honest with each other about what we liked, what we didn't. And it wasn't like we had let it fade over time. Even after 15 years, we still made love several times a week. That kind of thing doesn't happen in a dead marriage. That kind of thing doesn't happen when one person is secretly planning to walk away. But she did. She just walked out the door a few weeks ago for Damon. No warning. No real explanation. There hadn't been a single call, not even a goddamn text. No divorce papers. Nothing. It was like I had ceased to exist. And yet, I still needed to understand. What changed? What did I miss? Saturday night, I tried to drown the questions with whiskey. And Sunday morning, I was pretty sure I was dying. I sat up too fast and regretted it instantly. My head felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. My stomach twisted in protest. "Jesus Christ," I groaned, gripping my temples. There was a knock on the door. I ignored it. Then came another, louder this time. "Open up, man," Tom's voice called from the other side. I dragged myself off the couch and opened the door, squinting against the morning light. Tom took one look at me and shook his head. "You look like hell." "Feel worse," I muttered, stepping aside to let him in. Tom glanced at the empty bottles on the table. "So this is what we're doing now?" I slumped into a chair. "Guess so." He sat across from me, studying me for a long moment. "You know she ain't coming back, right?" I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "Yeah, then why are you doing this to yourself?" I had no answer for that. Tom sighed. "Look, Darren, I don't know why she left. Maybe she doesn't even know why. But if you keep going down this road, she's not the only thing you're gonna lose." I knew he was right. As much as it hurt, as much as I wanted to keep asking questions that had no answers, I had to stop. I decided right then and there not to let Claudia ruin what was left of my life. By late afternoon, I no longer wished to die. The pain in my head had dulled to a steady throb, my stomach had settled, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to clarity. I gathered up every bottle, every can, every last drop of booze strewn around the house, and carried it outside. I moved slowly, partly because my body still hated me, partly because I didn't need the neighbors watching me dump my self-destruction into the dumpster. The bags hit the bottom with a dull thud, the sound of a decision being made. This was my version of AA, the new 3-step process. Step 1. Stop drinking. Step 2. Forgive myself for the pain I had inflicted on me. Step 3. Forget about why Claudia had left me. The whys went into the dumpster with the booze. I wasn't wasting another second trying to figure out a woman who didn't have the decency to give me an answer. Hell, I didn't need 12 steps when 3 would work just as well. The first few days sober weren't easy. Mornings felt too long, nights felt too empty. But I kept busy, filling the silence with anything that wasn't her memory. I went back to the gym, something I hadn't done in years. I ran until my legs ached, lifted until my arms burned. It was the kind of pain I could control, and I liked that. By the end of the week, I had reached a new level of clarity. One simple, undeniable truth. I could no longer tolerate Claudia's actions. She and Damon would pay for my hurt and anger, and they wouldn't even know I had done it. I would bide my time, let things settle down. Rushing in with emotions high would only lead to mistakes, and mistakes weren't an option. My first priority was protecting my assets. If Claudia thought she could leave me for Damon and still walk away with half of what I'd built, she was dead wrong. Monday morning, I called my bank. I need to transfer my funds to a private account in my name only, I told the manager, keeping my voice steady. Also, cancel all joint credit cards immediately. Of course, Mr. Whitman, she said, typing away. Would you like to set up the new account at our branch? No, I said. Different bank. I'll handle the setup myself. There was a pause, just long enough for me to know she was debating whether to ask questions. Then she simply said, understood. Within days, the bulk of my money was safely moved. CDs were cashed in, investments liquidated. If I timed it right, I'd be broke by all appearances in a month. Next was the house. I met with a realtor that afternoon, a no-nonsense woman named Janine who looked like she'd been through more divorces, hers or other people's, than she could count. I need this house sold as fast as possible, I told her. She arched a brow. You looking for top dollar or just a quick sale? Both, if you can make it happen, I said. Janine smirked. Honey, I can make anything happen. I gave her the listing, knowing that the sooner the house sold, the sooner I could move my money out of the country before Claudia got smart and tried to freeze my accounts. None of this was strictly legal, but I didn't plan on sticking around to answer questions. Next, I called Ross. He'd been my lawyer for years, handled contracts and a few minor legal hiccups for me. More importantly, he was a friend. Ross, I need divorce papers drawn up, I said as soon as he picked up. He sighed. Damn, Darren. I was hoping I wouldn't get this call. Yeah, well, here we are. Any specific conditions? Standard no fault. But don't file them yet. Just have them ready. He didn't question it, which is why I trusted him. I'll have them done by the end of the week. Good, I said. And Ross, this stays between us. You know it does, he said. That was one less thing to worry about. The final step was cutting Claudia off completely. I changed all the locks on the house. If she wanted anything, she'd have to ask for it. I changed my phone number, too, and left instructions at work that no calls from Claudia were to be accepted. This might sound stupid, considering she hadn't even tried to contact me, but I needed to make it as hard as possible to be reached for now. The house had sold faster than I expected, barely over a month, and just like that, I was out. I left behind the place where Claudia and I had built our life together, traded it for a shitty little apartment near work. It wasn't much, but it was temporary. I wasn't planning on staying long anyway. My Cayman Islands account was sitting pretty at nearly 1.2 million, and with a little more careful maneuvering, I could vanish completely and live just fine. The last thing on my list was my retirement accounts. That would take a little more effort, but it was next on my to-do list. Claudia, on the other hand, wasn't in such a flexible position. She had a cushy government job that required high-level security clearance, and while it paid well, her retirement was locked up for another 15 years. Other than her paycheck and that bastard Damon, she didn't have much to fall back on. I decided it was time to put my plan into motion. Friday night, I invited a few guys from work out for drinks. Not because I wanted to drink, I wasn't touching that shit again, but because I needed to be at the bar Damon liked to frequent. I needed to be there, and I needed witnesses. Drinks on you, Whitman? Greg asked, clapping me on the back as we walked into the bar. Not a damn chance, I smirked. But first round's on me. There were 5 of us, just enough to make my presence look casual. We grabbed a table, ordered our beers, and settled in. I nursed mine, barely drinking, letting the conversation flow around me as I kept one eye on the door. Right on schedule, Damon strutted in, loud as ever, like he owned the place. He looked like he'd had a long, hard day of bullshit. He didn't see me right away. That was fine. I wanted him comfortable, unaware. After his second drink, I signaled the bartender and sent him another. The guy nodded, took the glass over, and gestured in my direction. Damon turned, confused at first. Then his eyes landed on me. I raised my beer slightly in acknowledgement, gave him the smallest smirk, then turned back to my friends and rejoined the conversation as if he didn't exist. I saw his reaction in the mirror behind the bar. He froze, eyes narrowing, brain working overtime to figure out what the hell I was playing at. Was I being friendly? Was I planning something? Did I know something he didn't? He was caught like a deer in the headlights of a speeding truck, and he knew it. But I never looked his way again. It was crucial that he didn't see a shred of aggression from me. If I lost my temper, if I threw a punch, it would ruin everything. Every ounce of strength in my body went into resisting the urge to knock his teeth in. Just maintain, I told myself. Let him do all the work. I kept it up for the next few nights, showing up at the same bar, same time. I never acknowledged him, never reacted, just carried on like he was nothing. And it ate away at him. Each night, he was there, that same confused, restless look on his face. It was driving him crazy, not knowing what I was thinking. And I was counting on that. Less than a week in, his curiosity got the better of him. He couldn't stand it anymore. Damon finally made his move. Hey, Darren, I want you to know that it wasn't anything personal, and it wasn't planned. You know, things just happened, and, well, anyway. I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Not personal. You stole my wife, and you don't think that's personal? It's okay, Damon. Don't even give it a second thought, I said smoothly, signaling the bartender. Hey, could you get us a couple of shots of the good stuff? Damon hesitated for a second, like he wasn't sure if he'd just walked into a trap. But when the bartender set the shots down, he relaxed a little. Man, you seem to be taking this pretty well. To be honest, I'm glad to be rid of her. She never was quite the wife I'd hoped for, I said, raising my glass before downing the shot. I immediately signaled for 2 more. Wow. You know, I never saw you like this. You never drank at any of the neighborhood parties. Well, Damon, I never could drink before, I said, leaning in slightly as if letting him in on some secret. See, when I first married Claudia, I drank like a fish. One night, I came home wasted and passed out. When I woke up the next morning, I had bruises all over me. Took me a few more times to figure out what was happening. He frowned. What do you mean? I smirked, shaking my head like I couldn't believe I had to spell it out for him. I pretended to be drunk one night and found out Claudia was beating the crap out of me with a rolling pin while I was out cold. Damon barked out a laugh, then stopped when he realized I wasn't joking. You're kidding, right? Claudia wouldn't do something like that. I shrugged, downing another shot. She won't do it to me again, that's for sure. I let the words hang for a second before changing the subject. Anyway, enough about her. Tell me about work. You still dealing with all that corporate bullshit? Damon relaxed again, happy to talk about himself. That was one thing I was counting on. I steered the conversation away from Claudia, letting him ramble on about his job, his boss, how irreplaceable he was. All the while, I kept his drinks coming. After a while, he got up, wobbling slightly, and muttered, "Gotta take a leak." Perfect. The second he disappeared down the hall, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the Rohypnol, and tipped it into his half-finished beer. I stirred it just enough to let it dissolve. It should take about 15 minutes until he's out on his feet. I had sobered up just enough to get behind the wheel, making sure I didn't attract any unwanted attention. Damon was completely out, slumped in the passenger seat like a sack of garbage. He didn't stir as I drove him home, and when I finally pulled into his driveway, I took a moment to admire my handiwork. Then, just for good measure, I leveled a few precise punches to his kidneys and back, nothing that would leave obvious bruises, but enough to make him feel like absolute shit in the morning. As quietly as I could, I dragged his dead weight to the doorstep and propped him against the door. I didn't bother knocking. Let him wake up in a puddle of regret. God, how I wished I could be a fly on the wall when he did. The next morning, I waited until a little before lunch to call Claudia at work. I knew she'd be cautious about answering, but when she finally did, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Darren. Hey, Claudia, I said, keeping my tone light. How've you been? There was a pause, and then, I'm fine. She was thrown off. She had probably been expecting me to yell, to curse her name, to demand explanations. But I didn't give her any of that. I know it's been a mess, I said, but I wanted to call and say I'm not angry anymore. I've got a few things to take care of, but I'd like to meet up in a few weeks. Talk about splitting our assets. I had no intention of giving her a damn thing, but I needed a reason to give her my new number, to make sure she had a way to reach me without suspicion. She was quiet for a moment, then sighed. I'm sorry, Darren. I really didn't plan for any of this to happen. Hey, I get it, I said smoothly. Life happens. I was so afraid to talk to you after. Please, don't, Claudia, I interrupted, forcing warmth into my voice. It's okay. I'm fine and you're happy. That's all that matters, right? But Darren, I should have. Claudia, I cut in again, this time firmer. I have to go. I'll call you in a couple of weeks. I could hear her start to cry just as I hung up. Perfect. She was feeling guilty now, and that was exactly what I needed. Claudia, racked with regret. Damon, convinced I was his best friend. This could not have gone better. I took my time before heading to the pub that evening. The hard work was done, and I wasn't in a rush. When I finally arrived, Damon was already half in the bag, drinking like the miserable bastard he was. Grinning, I walked right up behind him and smacked him on the back, right in the same spot I had punched him the night before. "How you doing, Damon?" I asked, giving him a friendly slap on the back. He flinched, just as I expected. "I've had better days, Darren." His voice was rough, like he hadn't gotten much sleep. I smirked. "A little hair of the dog? Yeah, I guess I overdid it last night. I don't even remember going home." "You were pretty plastered," I said with a chuckle. "I helped you into a cab. That explains why my car was still here today." He exhaled heavily, rubbing his face like he was still piecing things together. Then, after a moment, he asked, "Darren, when Claudia beat on you, did you ever do anything about it?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I quit drinking." "You mean you let her get away with it?" I shrugged. What the hell was I supposed to do? Call the cops? She was my wife. Or was I guess? I couldn't do that, so I quit the sauce. "I see your point." Damon looked down at his drink, swirling the liquid in his glass. "Why, Damon?" I asked, watching him closely. "Did she clobber you?" "Oh no," he said quickly, a little too quickly. "Just wondering." I held back a grin. The seed had been planted. "Bartender, 2 down here," I called, waving a hand. Damon was in for another long night, but this time, I had something special planned. The scenario would be nearly identical to the last. Drinks, conversation, a little chemical assistance. But tonight, I'd add a touch of nostalgia. If there was one thing I could always count on with Claudia, it was her love for baking pies. Her grandmother had taught her, and there was hardly a time when there wasn't a fresh piece of pie in the house. She used an old French rolling pin, a treasured family heirloom. It was just like the one I'd picked up from a culinary shop that afternoon. I could still picture Claudia gripping that rolling pin in her hands. And after tonight, I'd bet Damon would have a pretty vivid image of it, too. I didn't give him the full treatment this time, just enough to leave him aching for the next week or so. No broken bones, nothing that would land him in a hospital, but enough bruises to drive the message home. Enough for him to wake up convinced of exactly what I wanted him to believe. A few nights later, I found him in his usual spot at the pub. But this time, instead of his usual whiskey, Damon was sipping club soda. "Hey, Damon, what's with the drink?" I asked, nodding at the club soda in his hand. "You take the cure, or what?" "Nah," he muttered, swirling the glass. "Just trying to cut back a little. How's things with you these days?" I grinned. "Couldn't be any better. You know, I really need to thank you for taking that bitch off my hands. I haven't had this much fun in years." Damon frowned slightly. "How so, Darren?" "Shit, man, I got laid last night for the first time in 5 years," I said, shaking my head with exaggerated relief. "Man, it was great." He blinked. "You're joking, right? You're trying to tell me that you and Claudia didn't have sex for the last 5 years?" "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying," I replied, leaning against the bar. "She put out for the first year or two, but after that, I had to beg for it. I got real tired of that shit, so I just started taking matters into my own hands, if you get what I mean." I could practically see the gears grinding in his head, the little wheels of doubt and resentment creaking under the weight of my words. This was almost too easy. At this rate, I bet I could get him to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge in 2 weeks and send me a thank you note on the way down. I turned to the bartender. 2 triple jacks with Cuervo chasers, I ordered. Damon shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know if that's such a good idea, Darren. I've been hitting the stuff pretty hard lately." "Come on, you chicken, drink up," I taunted. That did it. I knew he couldn't stand being challenged without rising to the occasion. He grabbed his drink, threw it back, and chased it immediately with the tequila. I picked up my own glass, excused myself to the men's room, and once inside, I dumped the whiskey straight into the urinal. Then, for good measure, I pissed on it and flushed. By the time I got back, Damon had already ordered another round. I lifted my glass, pretended to sip, and let him do all the work. An hour later, he was barely able to walk. It took some careful maneuvering, but I managed to ditch almost every one of my drinks while he kept guzzling them down like water. I almost felt sorry for the poor bastard. Almost. By the time I got him back to his place, I laid into him with that rolling pin for a good 5 minutes. The bruises would last, the pain even longer. But the best part? He'd wake up tomorrow convinced that Claudia had done it. I had played Damon like an old, familiar fiddle. My morning was bright and full of sunshine, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of Claudia getting away with allegedly beating Damon. Even if she did, I had already gotten my licks in, and that was enough for me. Either way, I was out of here soon, and that suited me just fine. The sharp ring of my cell phone cut through my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and smirked when I saw the name. Claudia. using her one phone call from jail to talk to me. How thoughtful. I answered, and immediately, I could hear her sobbing, her words barely understandable between shaky breaths. Darren, she choked out. I didn't have anyone else to turn to. I put just the right amount of concern in my voice. Claudia, my God, what's going on? Are you okay? They arrested me, she whimpered. Damon came home drunk and passed out at the front door. When he finally got inside this morning, he started yelling and screaming that I beat him up. I paused for effect. Well, did you? How can you even ask me that? She cried, her voice rising in disbelief. You know me, Darren, I would never do that. I let out a dry chuckle. I thought I knew you once upon a time. She let out a shaky sigh. I deserve that, Darren. But I need your help. Please. I have no one else to turn to. None of my friends will have anything to do with me anymore after. Well, you know. I let the silence stretch a little longer before I asked, what are you charged with? They said domestic violence, she said, her voice quivering. And probably assault, too. Christ, Claudia, I muttered, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. You'll lose your job over this. You know you can't hold your security clearance now that you've been arrested. This is bad. What do you need me to do? Can you come down and bail me out? She begged. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm in deep shit. I have to get out and straighten out this whole mess. I let out a slow breath, pretending to weigh my options. Well, Claudia, you know I'd really like to, but I'm not in town. How about I send Ross to see you? Will that help? Her relief was almost palpable. That would be so wonderful, Darren, she said, her sobs turning to sniffles. I'll never be able to repay you. She was certainly right about that. If she couldn't find me, she couldn't pay me back. And that was just fine by me. I was already on my way to the airport when I called Ross, asking him to serve Claudia with divorce papers right there in the county clink. The thought of her sitting in that holding cell, clutching those papers, was enough to keep me laughing all the way to Miami. Before I left, I made sure to be generous. I left Claudia a total of $1,500, spread across our bank accounts. $100 for each year of our marriage. Poetic, wasn't it? After a few days and more currency exchanges than I cared to count, I was out of the Caymans, feeling lighter than I had in years. Lying on a sun-soaked beach with a Diet Pepsi in hand, I let my mind wander. I wondered how long Claudia had to sit in that cell, stewing over what she thought had happened. Not that it really mattered. I'd ask Ross when the time came to tell him where to send the final divorce decree. I figured that would be a post office box about 10,000 miles from wherever I was at the time. I took a slow sip of my drink and stretched out, enjoying the heat on my skin. Life had never tasted so sweet. But for now, I had to go. My pie should be just about ready to come out of the oven. Yeah, I kept it. A little souvenir to remind me of the great times I had with my best buddy Damon. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.